Let's get today's webinar started. Hello everyone, my name is Amrit and welcome back to this webinar series of learning Python from scratch. This is our sixth webinar, I do believe. So if you haven't seen the previous webinars, they are up on YouTube. Just search up SB Components on YouTube and they are on our YouTube channel. That being said, if you haven't seen any of our previous webinars, I do highly recommend you go check out our previous sessions because we keep building on. Yes, we keep building on what we've done so far. And not having done the previous, or not having understood the previous webinars may make it difficult for you. So they are up on YouTube, so in your own time, do have a look at them. That being said, in yesterday's webinar, we did start looking at records and discussing how to do records in Python. And the main reason for doing that is so we can make more interesting programs, which are a little bit more dynamic, rather than doing little boring programs to keep you interested and keep going. So yesterday, if I do share my screen, okay, let's just make sure you guys could hear everything I've been saying so far. Yep, cool. Let's put that to the side. I do have the chat up, so if you are in here live, you could ask me questions. So yesterday I did give everyone this as a challenge. So the first things first, I will be going over my version of this code and why I did the things, why I did things the way I did. Cool, so it's a really straightforward challenge. So let's keep that on this side and let's pull this over here. Let's keep the shell up. Cool. Wait, we also need the image just for reference. There it is. Cool. So this entire program revolved around you being able to use records, create your own record and use it. So I did use the method I showed you yesterday, the one I recommended to use, and also gave reasons why we should create records like this in yesterday's session. So do check that out if you haven't seen it. So this is our record, our abstract data type. And the entire idea of this program is that you have a bunch of stations as records. You then you then type in a station and it tells you if it has a toilet or not and if the toilet costs anything. So the way I did it is fairly straightforward. Firstly, our record has three properties. It has a name, it has a variable called toilet, and a variable called price. Now, this price variable is only relevant if it does have a toilet, but this for now is probably the simplest way of doing it. But you could implement a different way if you want this to only work if you have a if this is true, if you have a toilet. That being said, back to lesson 2 for a second. I intend to store strings in this variable. Obviously, if you haven't seen any of previous webinars, do go take a look. So our second webinar was on data types in Python and in programming languages in general. So I will be telling you what I intend to store in certain variables. So in name, I intended to store strings. Toilet is a Boolean. It's either true or false. If it has a toilet, it's true. If it doesn't have a toilet, it's false. And obviously, depending on that, it's price. Now, I did also use comments, as you can see, so I kind of broke down the program using comments so you understood what each section does. I also use a method. Methods are mainly used when you have repeating code. And since we are going to have a piece of code repeating, which is printing out the information depending if that condition was met. So if it has a toilet, obviously it's going to repeat. If it doesn't have a toilet, that print statement's going to repeat. So I put it all into one method. So I called the method print details. And in order to work, it needs a station. If the station has a toilet, obviously this is either going to be true or false. If the station has a toilet, print that it has a toilet and its price in pence. You can't really see that. Else, obviously, if it doesn't have a toilet, just print it does not have a toilet. So at this point, we don't care what the price is. Obviously, this can change. As I showed in yesterday's webinar, you can update these values. Go watch yesterday's webinar in order to fully understand it. So over here, I then go on and create our stations. I only created 4, just so I could show you these test cases. So in order to create them, remember, you don't have to give it self. Self is something Python does by itself. And also remember that you need 2 underscores for this to work. Something a lot of people forget. A lot of people just keep it to 1 underscore. You need 2, which basically tells Python that that is a special method. Yeah, so we create it. So I give it its name, where there's a toilet, and its cost. You could see fairly straightforward in that regard. And I just called, I named the variables whatever their actual name was over here. Of course, to create it, I just use whatever the class name was. In this case, was station with brackets and your values inside of it. Now, I don't think I mentioned this yesterday, but it's really good to have your classes start with capital letters. It's just a little convention. I'm not entirely sure actually if it would work if we didn't do this as a capital, but it's so we never start variables with capital letters, but we do start classes with capital letters. But yes, that's just a little thing. It's not the end of the world if you don't do this. It's just recommended just for consistency's sake. So then we get the user's input just to ask what station they're talking about, and then we compare it to every single one of these names, and if it's one of these names, we then call this method print details. So as you can see, print details, and we just give it the station we're talking about. So that's really straightforward. So the entire point of this was to practice if statements and using records. So if it's equal to whatever the name was, obviously to access a variable, we just use whatever our record is. So in this case, it was Stephanie Green. And then dot name refers to whatever name you gave it. Of course, in this case, it's Stephanie Green. So let's quickly run this just to see how it works. Run module, okay. So let's pull up the image again, this one. There we go. And let's just do King's Cross, just as our first example. King's Cross. And there we go, King's Cross does have a toilet, which is 10p. I just realized that there is a space there, but it wouldn't take too long to get rid of that space. That's fine. And let's say you type in something that isn't a station. So let's run it one more time. And let's just type in some gibberish. There we go, is a London Underground station, check your spelling. Of course, that's done with the else statement. Otherwise, just print whatever the user typed in, and the rest of it, like the program here, asked for. So over here is Oxford Street, London Underground station, check your spelling. So if you did get this running, well done. This isn't one of the easiest, and it's only going to get slightly harder from here. But that being said, it's going to get more interesting because now we can make more and more interesting programs. That being said, for our next challenge and topic, we won't be using records. We'll get back into records in a lesson or two. So let's get rid of this and let's get rid of this. There we go. So today we will be looking at a very important idea in programming, which are loops. It's all well and good that we could do code line by line. Now we're going to look at loops, so we could repeat certain pieces of code, and if you want the entire code again and again and again. So obviously this is really useful if you never want your code to end. So if you just want to go on continuously, this is useful for that. Or if you have a code that repeats itself again and again and again, we will look at how to do that. It's better than writing out your code. So rather than having, let's say you want to ask 100 people their age, rather than typing out age one is equal to input, so on and so forth, rather than doing that 100 times, you could just use a loop and do that 100 times. Just do that once, like type it out once, but it does it 100 times for you. So as you could imagine, loops are very important. Now, in most programming languages, um, there are two types of main loops. In some, there's variations of each. Um, Python has two main ones. No, Python does have two ones that we are going to go over. Um, the first one we're going to go over is a for loop, and then after a while we'll look at while loops. As you can see, both of them are keywords, but for today's lesson, we are going to be looking at for loops. Cool. So let's get into how we use loops and how they work. Now, the best way to describe it is, the best way to describe a for loop is you use this loop when you know how many times you want to execute a piece of code. So let's play around with it. Python has pretty unique syntax for for loops. It makes it fairly straightforward to understand compared to some other languages, but arguably there's makes more sense. So Python has its advantages and disadvantages. So of course, for is a keyword, and the way you do a for loop, for loops are also very useful for playing around with arrays, but we'll look at that, I think, tomorrow's session. So tomorrow's session will be heavily using for loops and learning arrays and how to play around with them in for loops. But today we're just going to look at a simple for loop just to do something X amount of time. So the way it works in Python is for, and then you give it a variable name. So you kind of create a variable within for loops, and that goes for pretty much all programming languages. So in for loops, you generally speaking create an extra variable during the loop. And in most cases, and you'll see a lot of people use the letter I. If I is not available, people then move on to J. But generally speaking, in a lot of when you see a lot of other people's code, they always use I off the bat. We're just creating a new variable called I for now. So for I in is another keyword we're going to be using in Python. So for I in, and then range is our final keyword for today. And I'm just going to say 10. So for I in range 10. And this basically tells Python to do this piece of code 10 times. So whatever you say now, Python will do it 10 times. So if I say print 1, let's run this, or a module, okay. And there we go, Python printed 1 10 times. So if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There we go, Python did it 10 times. But that being said, we kind of need to understand this range function a little better, because if I instead do print I, so print the value of I, run, okay, as you can see it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now this does print 10 values, but it starts from 0 to 9. So if you do count them, this is 10, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But this confuses a lot of people. Now reason being is, as computer scientists, we always start from the number 0. As a computer scientist, you kind of need to get used to counting from 0 and then counting up like that. So as a computer scientist, your first number is always 0. So then 0, 1, and so on to 9. So technically speaking, the way you could think about it is range just goes from 0 to 1 minus whatever this value is. Another thing to point out is I always changes. So each time you run a for loop, so each time you iterate through a code, each time you go through whatever you want to repeat, I will always increase by 1. So the first time it runs, it's going to be 0. The second time it runs, it's going to be 1. The second time it runs, it's going to be 2. The next time is 3. Next time is 4. And a better way to kind of prove it is just print a line. So that's probably too big. Just print a line just so we know each time the for loop kind of ends. There we go. So the first time it ran, it was 0. Second time it ran, it was 1. The third time it ran, it was 2, so on and so forth. So each time it runs, it just increases in value. Of course, in here, I can change the value of I, so I plus equals 1. If you don't know what plus equals do take a look at yesterday's webinar. And if we do run this, well, within this, it should change. There we go. So, oh wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, wait, 0, 1, 1. Oh yeah, oh, that just confused me really badly. I thought that didn't work for a second. So run this. This must make it a little bit more clear. There we go. Actually, that's probably not the best way to do it. Oops. Let's cut that and let's put it over here. So if you run this, this would be a better example of how it does it. So you can add one to, you can play around with I within this piece of code. But over here, as you can see, do remember, do know that it does continue as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Reason being is I'll explain why that is the case tomorrow. Even though you add I here, why it then goes on. So in this example, even though you add 1 to I, why it doesn't change when you go next. We could even add 2 here. 2, run this. Okay. There we go. So even though you add 2 to it, it still resets. Why that is, I'll explain tomorrow, is because we need to understand arrays. But just for now, note that I is a variable and you can play around with it while you are inside of a for loop. And that's the basics we're going to be kind of covering over today, and how else we could play around with range. Range is a really interesting inbuilt function in Python, and there's a lot of cool things you could do in it. Sorry. Now, a second thing you could use range for is instead of going from 0 to 1 minus a value, you could go from one value to another. So let's say we want to go from 10 to 20. We could run this, and there we go. Python goes 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19. Of course, it always goes 1 minus whatever this value is. So this is 10 values, so 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. It is 10 values. But just always keep that in mind. So if you wanted to go to 20, you're going to have to change that to 21, and then it will go to 20. There we go. So that's another really interesting thing you can do. So go from one value to another, so one specific value to another. And the most important for your challenge that you may want to understand is being able to go backwards. So you can go backwards, but you have to specify it. So we want to go from 10 to, let's say, 0. We want to go from 10 to 0, and we're going to be minusing 1 each time. So if you only give range 1 input, it will go from 0 to that number. Of course, if you give a negative number, I think it does kind of break it. If you give it 2 numbers, it will go from the first number to the second number. And if you give it 3 numbers, you'll go from the first number to the second number by using the third number, by adding the third number each time. So we'll go from 10 to 0 by adding 1 each time. So if we run this, okay, there you go, 1, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Obviously, if we do minus 2, run this, run module, okay. It went 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. And of course, 2 minus 2 is 0, so we just kind of stop there. If we did do minus 3, we'll see even less numbers. The only way you're going to fully understand this is by playing around with it. So 10, 7, 4, 1, and then 1 minus 3 is less than 0, so we'll just stop. Let's test out what happens when you just give 2 numbers, but the first one is bigger than the second one, because I did say it'll go from this number to this number. So if you run this, I do believe, yeah, we'll do nothing, because you're trying to go from here to here, but it's already bigger, so Python just skips it. And that's just some of the ways you could play around with for loops. If you ever want, so for loops generally are used if you want to do something a specific amount of times. Another really cool thing you could do are embedded for loops. So you could have another for loop for j in, let's say, range 10 again. Let's remove the 0 from up here. Over here we could do print I and then j. That's not an I and then J. You can run this, and then, whoops, I forgot my colon. There we go, colon, and this also needs to be indented. So each time you Python is dependent on indentation rather than brackets to tell it what's part of it or not. So as you can see, it printed out a lot of numbers, but essentially what it did is each time this runs once, this runs, so each time this for loop runs, this one runs 10 times for each time this one runs. So 10 times 10, this did print 100 rows of numbers. So it'll be 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, 5, 0, 6, all the way to 9, 9. So this is 100 lines, but this is what we call embedded for loops, so embedded loops, and they could be really useful in order, if you want to try every single combination, you can. Let's say you have a 3-digit lock, just for an example. You could also do for, instead of IJ, let's use Z in range 10. Obviously, combination locks generally use for digits from 0 to 9. And if you just wanted to see every single possible combination, you could always do I, J, and then Z. This is going to take a second to print. And this is every single combination for a 3-digit combination lock, which has numbers from 0 to 9. There we go. So if we do the math, that is 10 times 10 times 10, which is, so Python just printed 1,000 rows for you. So if you ever wanted to unlock a 3-digit combination lock, your number is going to be one of these numbers. Of course, trying to do that in real life is going to be a pain, but as a programming language, it could do it really quickly. It just takes a little second to print. Yeah, so you could do a lot of cool stuff with embedded loops. Cool. So that's just a basic understanding of for loops. So in Python, your basic syntax is for a variable name. It could even be ASDF. It doesn't really matter. In, then the keyword range or the key function range, and then how many times you wanted to do it. So we wanted to do it 10 times. And a unit for print ASDF. Whoops, I also forgot my colon here. Indent this, run, or module. Okay. There we go. So it doesn't matter what our variable was called. We literally just create a variable here. But do know, as soon as you exit the for loop, this indentation, this doesn't have any indentation, which means it's not part of this for loop. Oh wait, no, I think Python. Yeah, so Python does continue on you using the variable, but in other programming languages, you would not be able to do this 100%. So as soon as your for loop ends, in other programming languages, this is destroyed. But in Python, I do believe it stays around for a little bit longer. So do keep that in mind. What else? What else about for loops? By the way, I do have chat open, so if you do have any questions, you can let me know. I think for now, that is good enough for loops. We will be looking at how to play around with for loops and arrays in tomorrow's session. So tomorrow's session would be a bit more beefy if we do have a session tomorrow, which I'm not 100% sure, so I need to check about that. But tomorrow's webinar will be about arrays, and for loops are going to be a big part, just so we can play around with arrays. So let's make a program using a for loop, and let's kind of see how it applies in the real world kind of thing. So I have a simple program here. I do have a challenge for you using for loops, which I will be giving at the end. So let's quickly try to make this, and then we'll get into the challenge. So I will be commenting as we go along and following all the rules this states. So let's read this through. So I have a program that uses a for loop, so that's the entire idea of this. Uses a for loop to print out the version of the 10 in bed rhyme, but for initial number in the bed given by the user. So essentially, user gives a number, and we kind of write out this poem until there's only one person left, where you write this statement. So you go. So if you type in 3, you write this for 3, then for 2, then 1 is this. So if you write this for 30, this will be for 30, then 29, then 28, then 27, then 26, and then when you get to 1, you write that. So that's exactly what it says there. So there's 30, you count down from 30 all the way to 1. Um, this is really important. So from now on, I'm going to try to make you use methods and comments just to get used to it, because it is very important if you do start writing code professionally. So yeah, so the program must be split into methods. It's up to you how you want to split into methods, but this is a good guideline on what some of the methods should be able to do. So one method should ask for and return the number of beds to start with. Another should take the current number in the bed as Another should take the current number in the bed as argument and print a single verse. So that will be fairly straightforward to do. Make sure you comment your program, and make sure your variables have good, meaningful names. Cool, so let's get into it. So the first thing we want to do is ask the user for an input, and then we'll play around with it. But of course, over here, I said try to put that into a method, so that's exactly what we're going to do. So obviously, in order to create a method, we need to use the keyword def, but let's quickly comment it. So get number of beds from the user. Oops, user. So that's what this method is going to do. And generally in programming, you kind of want to have one comment per method, just kind of explaining what that method is supposed to do. Obviously, we could give this method any name. So let's give it number beds. So NO for short for number. And it doesn't take any arguments. We don't need to give this method anything in order for it to work. So obviously we do a colon, and as soon as you press enter, Python automatically indents you to a reasonable amount. Cool, so all this method needs to do is the number of beds the user wants this rhyme to do, or no, the number of people, and this should return it. This can be done in one line, and I'll show you that in a second, but let's do it in a more logical manner. So we want to store in a variable. Let's call this variable number people. Let's change this to number people now that I think about it. Number of people, number of people. Actually, to save confusion, let's change it. So just number. I guess just NO is a good enough variable. So just number. Actually, number. There we go. Number. Number is equal to int, because obviously we want to change it to an int afterwards, and we want an input from the user. And what we want to say is, how many are there in the bed? There we go. And then we want to return number. So we get whatever number the user gives us, and then we return it. So where you call this method, that would return it. If you wanted to make this more concise, all you have to do is take this and put that there. So this is it done in one line. So all this method does, it returns how many times the user wants to play this or do the poem. So that's kind of the first task kind of done. So one method that asks and return the number of beds, the number in the bed to start with, and another should take this number and kind of process it and print it. So let's write another thing that processes it. So process number, and we need to give it people, so the number of people in the bed. So in order for this method to work, we need to give it the number of people. Yeah, no, we don't want this to be the same name, or this is going to confuse Python. So we just want we just want people. And how does it process what it needs to do? Well, it's pretty straightforward. If people is equal to 1, because that's the only unique case. Otherwise, we just do the same thing. If it's 1, we give a special message. We print the special message if there's only one person left in the bed. There was one in the bed, and the little one said good night. Food night, cool. Good night. So that's a unique case done. But if it's not one, so else, we print out the special statement, which is fairly long. So I'm just going to simplify it to, let's use quotes. There are people. There are in the bed. There are bang people in the bed. There we go. So for now, all our why is this shifted to the left? There we go. So for now, we have one method. Let's tell whoever's going to be reading this code, if you do give this code to someone else, what this does. So process the number we are on, and process the number we are on, and display a message. There we go. Now the actual code that actually does the job. This can be done in 2 lines, technically speaking, but I'll do it in a more logical way so it makes sense. And then I'll show you the 2 lines method, which just kind of shows how flexible programming languages can be. So over here, let's say this is the main part that runs. Cool. So first, we get the number of people. So number of people is equal to number P-E-O-P-L-E, number of people. So that stores how many people, and then we could do for I in range, and we want to go from this number all the way down to 1. Of course, if we want to go down to 1, we need to go down 1 less than that, so to 0. Always kind of remember. So we want to go from people. Remember, people is a number to 0. And we want to go -1 each time. So do remember, when it hits 0, it's not going to run it. So if we did this to 1, it will get down to 2 and stop. We want it to do it for 1. So we do 0. So when it hits 0, then it breaks. It doesn't run when it hits 0. So when it hits 0 to stop, and then when you're at, so each time you run it, all we want to do is process number, and we want to give it I, so it does I each time. So if we run this, this should work, unless it's a syntax error. So how many in bed? Let's just do a simple number like 5. There we go. So there are 5 in bed, 4 in bed, 3 in bed, 2 in bed, and then there was 1 in bed, and the little one said good night. Straightforward enough. So let's test this for a bigger number like 30. There we go. So 30, 29, 20, all the way down to 1, and 1 is the only special one. So as you can see, this is a fairly straightforward program that solves this this challenge. I can't think of anything else in particular to say about this off the top of my head, but let me let me show you a more concise kind of version, which instead of 3 lines, it literally does it in 2. So for I in range number people. So yes, you can have methods within like methods. So technically speaking, you can run this method instead of this method if this method returned. Oh wait, no, this method does return an end. So you can have methods within arguments. So first, this method will run, and then it will use whatever this returns over here as an argument. So over here, we can literally have it to 0, and then -1, and then we just wanted to do this same thing again. So let's do that. Let's paste this. Let's make these into comments so these don't run. And then we also don't want this to run, so coming out. So let's run it, run module, okay. There we go, does the exact same thing. Let's do it from 30. Bang, so 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, all the way down to 1. So that's just to show it can be done in one line, and you can have methods being run within other methods. So range is technically a method. It's a function. It gives you, every time you run the loop, it just gives you the next value that you want to do. And yeah, it's fairly straightforward. So this is just a quick demonstration on for loops. Tomorrow we'll be using for loops more heavily with arrays, and that will make, and we can make a lot more interesting programs using a combination of arrays and for loops. What else? And I think that is it for today. Today seems to be a bit of a quicker one. The entire idea was for you to understand and play around with for loops a bit better. And yeah, so we all go all the way from 30 all the way to 1 in this scenario, and 1 is a unique case. As your challenge, this is the challenge case that I will be giving you. So this also, you need to use for loops. It's a bit more complicated, it's a bit more wordy, which is why I used it as a challenge. There is a slight hint. If you don't understand the hint, don't worry, just try to get this up and running. So of course you do need to use a for loop, and the essential idea is the program asks for a number, so the maximum points for the swimming race. You give it its number, and then it asks for the 4 people swimming their disability category, and if it adds up, if it's over this number, it is not legal. If it's equal to this number or below, I think it's legal. Just have a read of it carefully. I will be giving you my answer in the next webinar. I will be using the hint and what this is about. You should have a methods and comments. So do also try to use methods and comments and trying to get into the habit of using them, because they are very useful. So if you are on YouTube, you can pause the video, try doing this now. If you are watching this live, you can just take a quick screenshot. This will be on YouTube in give or take 2 hours. Yesterday's webinar was kind of delayed, and I think was uploaded the morning of doing this webinar. So bear with us if it isn't up within 2 hours. It will be up eventually. So if you have any questions, do ask in the chat. If you're watching this on YouTube, do come to the live sessions if you have any questions. It's one of the best ways for me to answer. Or of course you could Google it. A lot of answers are on Google nowadays. So tomorrow's session we will be looking at arrays and for loops, how to play around with both of them, and how to manipulate arrays. Arrays are very useful. And so that being said, tomorrow's webinar, or I'm not sure if there will be one tomorrow, but the next webinar will be fairly important to make better and more interesting programs. I don't see any messages in the chat, so I'm gonna end this webinar here. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will see you in the next webinar. Bye-bye.